Hello, I'm Dr. Q. Welcome to my channel. We will discuss aggregate demand in this video. In 2006, the United States housing bubble peaked, and then the bursting of the housing bubble triggered the American subprime mortgage crisis. Now it is called the Great Recession, which refers to the multinational financial crisis that occurred between 2007 and 2010. The crisis led to a severe economic recession, with millions losing their jobs and many businesses bankrupting. The U.S. government intervened with a series of measures to stabilize the financial system. The bursting of the housing bubble was the immediate cause. The fundamental cause is the lack of supervision of the financial system. Government policies aimed at expanding home ownership, the influx of money from the private sector, the banks entering into the mortgage bond market, speculation by many home buyers, and the predatory lending practices of the mortgage lenders, moral hazard within the financial industry are all important catalysts of the subprime crisis. Why is it called a subprime crisis? Prime is good, while subprime is not so good. Subprime is because it is a financial crisis primarily caused by a large number of defaults on subprime loans, which are loans given to borrowers with poor credit histories, meaning they are considered below prime or higher risk than traditional borrowers, leading to widespread financial instability when many of these loans began to fail simultaneously. The crisis had severe, long-lasting consequences for the US and European economies. The whole world's economy was negatively impacted. The US entered a deep recession with nearly 9 million jobs lost during 2008 and 2009, roughly 6% of the workforce. The number of jobs did not return to the December 2007 pre-crisis peak until May 2014. With that said, questions need to be asked to help us avoid this situation in the future. Why didn't the actions initiated by the government, such as reductions in interest rates and a $787 billion stimulus package, boost the economy or aggregate demand as intended? Why was the unemployment rate so high for so long? Anything else makes the economy worse off? Those questions will be answered during this study, and that's why we're studying in this and the next few video sessions. There are several movies and documentaries about the subprime crisis, very interesting. One of the best is The Big Short, which explain the cause and consequences of the subprime crisis inside out. Interestingly, Dr. Richard Thaler, the 2017 recipient of the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences, for his contribution to behavioral economics, appeared in a movie to explain the subprime crisis. I recommend you to read his book, Nudge. The aggregate demand aggregate supply model seems similar to the demand and supply model in microeconomics. Both demands are downward sloping and both supply curves are upward sloping. But the similar shape is due to different reasons. We will discuss this further in detail. In previous study, we assumed an immediate short-run model and therefore a fixed price level. From this chapter and the next few videos, we'll discuss a dynamic model with varying prices and output. This figure depicts the aggregate demand curve. The downward sloping aggregate demand curve AD indicates an inverse or negative relationship between price level and the amount of real output purchased. Aggregate demand is a schedule or a curve showing the various amounts of real domestic output that domestic and foreign buyers desire to purchase at each price level. On each price level, we can find a unique real GDP on aggregate demand curve. The explanation of the inverse relationship is not the same as the demand for a single product, which is centered on declining marginal utility, substitution, and income effects. The substitution effect doesn't apply within the scope of domestically produced goods, since there's no substitute for everything, all the goods and services produced within. The income effect also doesn't apply in the aggregate case, since income now varies with aggregate output. The inverse relationship between the price level and the real output in aggregate demand is explained by the following three effects. First, real balances effect. When the price level falls, the purchasing power of existing financial balances is enhanced, which can increase spending and purchase more output. When the price level goes up, the purchasing power of the existing financial balances deteriorates, then spending on outputs, goods and services, decreases. For example, a household may purchase a car when the purchasing power of its financial asset balances is $50,000. They may change their mind or defer paying if it's only $30,000. The second one is the interest rate effect, which occurs when the change in the price level leads to a change in interest rates and interest-sensitive spending. Let me talk briefly about how the banking system works. People receive income, they spend some, and save some. For savings, generally speaking, people deposit into bank accounts, and they can withdraw their money in the future when it's needed. On top of that, they're likely to get interest. Interest rates on deposits, particularly term deposits, typically vary depending on the length of the term, meaning longer deposit terms generally offer higher interest rates compared to shorter terms. Essentially, the longer you commit your money, the higher the potential return you can earn. Because within the term, the bank can loan your money to businesses for investment and get higher interest. Banks profit out of the interest difference. The longer the term, the more flexibility the banks have for loaning the money. When the price level increases, people need more money to purchase the same goods and services. For example, a $10 bill will do if an item costs $10. But when the item price is $11, a $10 bill does not work. We need another $1 bill to pay for the item. Therefore, society demands more money bills when the price level goes up. If the supply of money bills is fixed, that will drive the price of money bills up, and the price has a special name, the interest rate. Because people keep more money bills in their pocket to pay, less money can be deposited in banks. Banks need to offer an attractive interest rate to attract adequate deposits for loans. Higher interest rates are charged on businesses and individual loans as a result. It will discourage investment and interest-sensitive consumption spending. For example, a firm finds a project profitable as the rate of return is 6% and the interest rate to borrow money to finance the project is 5%. Now, the firm finds the project unprofitable if the interest rate is 7%, which is higher than the rate of return. Therefore, no investment spending will be made. Similarly, consumers may choose not to purchase a house or a car if the interest rate for the loan is higher. Therefore, a higher price level reduces the amount of real output demanded. On the other hand, when the price level of goods and services drops, people need less money to purchase the same amount of goods and services. They keep less money in their pocket and deposit more in the bank. The banks have a lot of money in deposits to loan out. They offer the depositor a lower interest rate because they don't need to offer much to attract your money deposited in the banks. When interest rates are lower, it also means it's cheaper to borrow money, which leads to more investment spending and more interest-sensitive consumption. Businesses will borrow money for acquiring capital or expansion. Consumers will borrow money to buy expensive goods and services like cars, home improvements, or houses. So price and real GDP move in the opposite direction. The third one is the foreign purchases effect. When the price level falls in the United States, other things being equal, the goods and services in the US are cheaper. relative to the same ones in the rest of the world. International consumers purchase more of cheaper US goods, which tends to increase spending on US exports. The goods services demanded by international consumers increase. Meanwhile, US consumers prefer cheaper domestic goods and services. This decreases import spending in favor of US products that compete with imports. So the goods and services demanded by domestic consumers also increase. On the other hand, if the price level goes up in the United States, other things being equal, the goods and services become more expensive relative to the same goods and services in the rest of the world. International consumers decrease purchasing more expensive American goods, so the US export decreases. The Americans also import more as it's cheaper that way. The amount demanded by international and domestic consumers decline. Again, price and real GDP move in the opposite direction. The foreign purchase effects in aggregate demand are similar to the substitution effects in the demand for individual goods and services. Again, price and real GDP move in the opposite direction. As we learned in the principles of microeconomics, when the price level change, the output or real GDP changes. The demand relationship does not change, and the demand curve does not change. It's simply a movement along the same demand curve. When price level decrease, we move along the aggregate demand curve this way. When price level increases, we move along aggregate demand curve this way. Determinants of aggregate demand are the other things, the factors besides price level that can cause a shift or change in demand. One, changes in consumer spending, which can be caused by changes in several factors, such as consumer wealth, consumer expectations, household debt, and taxes. Two, changes in investment spending, which can be caused by changes in real interest rates. Another factor is expected returns, which are a function of expected future business conditions, technology, degree of excess capacity, and business taxes. Three, changes in government spending. Four, changes in net export spending that are unrelated to the price level may be caused by changes in other factors such as national incomes abroad and exchange rates. This figure shows changes in aggregate demand. A change in one or more of the listed determinants of aggregate demand will shift the aggregate demand curve. The right word, shift, from aggregate demand 1 to aggregate demand 2 represents an increase in aggregate demand. This is true at every price level. So at this price level, initially on aggregate demand 1, the real GDP is this much. Now shift to aggregate demand 2. The real GDP is this much. This is true not only at this price level, it is true on every single price level. From here to here. And See this one? From here to here. The leftward shift from aggregate demand 1 to aggregate demand 3 shows a decrease in aggregate demand, and is also true at all price level. See, this price level, real GDP declines from here to here, move closer to 0, and at this price level, the new GDP is this much, initial GDP is this much. And this price level, new GDP is this much, initial GDP is this much. The vertical distance between aggregate demand 1 and the dashed line represent the initial changes in spending. So initially we're here. From here to here, initial change in increase in spending, initial decrease in spending. Through the multiplier effect, that spending produces the full shifts of the curves. The initial increase in consumer spending, investment spending, government spending, and net export shifts aggregate demand to a dashed line to the right. For example, a 5 billion extra investment shifts to the dashed line. If marginal propensity to consume is 0.75, then according to the formula, the multiplier is the inverse of marginal propensity to save, or the inverse of 1 minus marginal propensity to consume. So it is 1 over 1 minus 0.75. So the denominator is a quarter, the multiplier is 4. Then aggregate demand 1 actually will shift to aggregate demand 2. 4 times distance between the initial and dashed line. After the shift, at each price level, 5 billion multiply for 20 billions in additional real GDP, real goods and services is demanded. Note that the multiplier effect works both ways. An initial decreases in aggregate demand results in a lesser amount of everything at each price level. Consumer wealth is the difference between household assets and liabilities. Assets refers to real, real estate, stocks, and bonds. Liabilities refer to mortgage, loans, and credit card balances. The value of the asset can change, and the consumer will react by spending more as asset values increase and less as asset values decrease. Households can borrow to spend more, which increase aggregate demand, and if the household reduces spending to pay off household debt, aggregate demand decreases. Expectations of future higher incomes or higher prices will increase current household spending and the current aggregate demand. Expectations of lower household income or lower prices in future will decrease the current aggregate demand. A reduction in personal income taxes increases disposable income and household spending, increasing aggregate demand. On the other hand, an increase in taxes decreases disposable income and household spending, decreasing aggregate demand. Investment spending is spending on capital goods. Increases in investment spending increase aggregate demand. Decrease in investment goods decrease aggregate demand. As real interest rates increase, the cost of borrowing increases, and subsequently less will be borrowed, resulting in less money spent, reducing aggregate demand. On the other hand, a decrease in real interest rates will increase borrowing and subsequently investment spending will increase aggregate demand. If business owners and managers are optimistic about the future expected returns, they will spend more now on increasing aggregate demand. And if expected returns are less than favorable, they will spend less now on reducing aggregate demand. New technologies enhance future expected returns and thus motivate businesses to spend money on the new technology, increasing aggregate demand. If excess capacity increases, business will decrease current spending, decreasing aggregate demand. If excess capacity decreases, business will increase spending and expand operations, increasing aggregate demand. An increase in business tax will decrease the amount of after-tax income for businesses, reducing the amount of spending business can do and reducing aggregate demand. A decrease in business tax will have the opposite effect on aggregate demand. The variability of interest rates and expected returns makes investment highly volatile. Investment is the least stable component in aggregate demand. Other things equal, if government spending increases, aggregate demand increases. An example will be the government spending more on transportation infrastructure. If government spending decreases, aggregate demand decreases. An example of this is less military spending. Other things equal, increase in the U.S. exports means an increase foreign demand for U.S. goods. Aggregate demand increase to the right. Note that nothing else changes. No price level changes, etc. If net export spending rises, aggregate demand rises. If net export spending declines, aggregate demand declines. As the national incomes of the U.S. trading partners increase, they are more able to purchase the U.S. produced goods and services, which increases aggregate demand. If the foreign nation's incomes decline, the opposite occurs. For exchange rate, if the dollar depreciates, aggregate demand increases. Depreciation of the dollar encourages U.S. exports since U.S. products become less expensive as foreign buyers can obtain more dollars for their currency. Conversely, dollar depreciation discourages import buying in the US because our dollars cannot be exchanged for as much foreign currency. Aggregate demand can decrease through changes in currency exchange rates. If the US dollar appreciates, the currency appreciation of the dollar discourages US exports because now US goods are relatively more expensive than before since it takes more foreign currencies to buy the US dollar. This will also encourage more import spending since the US dollar can buy more of another nation's currency than before. Net exports will decline, which reduces aggregate demand. Let's do practice. Pause and come back. All right, the first step is to figure out the multiplier. Using a formula, it's the inverse of marginal propensity to save, or the inverse of 1 minus marginal propensity to consume. And the multiplier is the following: 10 over 3. The initial investment is 3 billion. Multiply the multiplier 10 over 3, so increase by 10 billions. That's all I have for this video. See you in the next one.